I think I'm getting 25 minutes and 10 and 10. Well, the senior ministers who delivered the budget have scuttled off. We did them the courtesy of listening to their diatribe of propaganda to justify their budget, but they couldn't do us the courtesy of listening to our response. But I suppose that sort of says everything about this government, because they just don't listen. But I can tell you, the people will not be fooled by this budget. Despite all the leak strategy, all the spin, all the interviews, no doubt they're doing where they're trying to sell this budget, the people will not be fooled. And the truth about this budget is very, very simple. It is hopelessly inadequate. It is pathetic for the most part, and at times it is downright insulting in terms of dealing with the problems that ordinary working families and vulnerable people and pensioners and students are dealing with out there. The truth about this budget is that the government have decided to unload the cost of the COVID pandemic on working people rather than ask the very wealthy and the corporations who did extremely well during the pandemic to pay their contribution towards the bill for the COVID pandemic. That is the truth about this budget. And it's obvious when you look at the round and you even look at the government figures. A totally insulting €5 a week for pensioners and social welfare recipients. That's a 2% increase as against inflation, which is running at just under 4%, but in addition to that, you can add the energy price hikes, the carbon tax increases that are coming down the road, the local property tax increases, all of which fall much more heavily and disproportionately on the less well-off and on working families. So you are asking, through inflation, ordinary working people to pay the bill for the COVID pandemic so that your wealthy friends and your corporate friends can continue to live on the pig's back. That is the truth of this budget. The housing issue, which of course is the major issue that we are facing in this country, where the government has failed consistently in successive governments to do the basic thing of put an affordable roof over people's head. And the government have been trumpeting a figure of €4 billion in exchequer funding to go to housing. But when you actually look at the budget, there is some additional money for capital expenditure in housing, but it is nowhere near the €4 billion figure. It's just not in the budget. And in fact, the additional money you have put into the housing budget will be more than accounted for by the rising inflation costs in building materials in the construction sector at the moment, and will end up at similarly abysmal delivery figures in terms of social and genuinely affordable housing to the ones that have brought us to the desperate housing crisis that we are currently in. And all of that because the government just doesn't want to break from its addiction to filling the pockets of the corporate landlords. So even after all the talk of a step change in terms of housing policy and the direct delivery of public and affordable housing by the government itself, next year 14,000 new HAP tenancies, 13,000 new public and affordable homes, if the latter are even delivered. That's the truth. No change. The big money continues to pile into the pockets of the corporate landlords, with 66,000 people taken off housing lists as if the problem has been solved, but in actuality in insecure tenancies, paying extortionate rents with public money pouring into the pockets of the corporate landlords. That is the truth of what's going on in housing. The vacant, the zoned land levy, which is a nod to the urgent need to deal with the rampant land hoarding and speculation of the property investors and of the big property developers, an utterly pathetic and meaningless gesture, where we replace the vacant site levy, which was a 7% annual charge on sites that should have been used to deliver public and affordable housing, replaced with a 3% charge, which will not come into force until 2024. So that all the shenanigans that allowed them to get around the vacant site levy in any event, and which made it completely meaningless and ineffective, they will be able to do in terms of this new levy, which in any event is simply a fraction of the enormous profits they are making just by sitting on empty properties and vacant land as they watch the value of their assets climb through the roof. And again, this is not rhetoric. You look at the central bank's recent quarterly figures on net household wealth, and they are staggering beyond belief. The accumulation of wealth in the last year in the hands of the richest in our society is simply beyond the comprehension of anybody. The figures are so staggering. We now have national household wealth that jumped 89 billion last year to a record 883 billion euro. And the 5% of the richest people in this country who own all those land banks and property banks, 85,000 people, have between them 331 billion euro. That gives them an average household income of 3.8 million, and rising and rising and rising. But no wealth taxes on that, no capital gains tax on that accumulation of profits, and all the rents that they're generating on those extortionate rents they're charging to people who can barely afford to put the roof over their head. They're not asked to pay the bill for COVID, but ordinary people are, who are struggling to pay the rent. And with the housing crisis continuing to spiral out of control. And I'll tell you, I'll give you the simplest of contrasts. If those big macro figures on household wealth boggle the mind, and they do boggle the mind, and of course that's why they're never debated, because people don't look at this stuff, the shadow budgets of the accumulation of the wealth of the rich and the tax reliefs, which are never discussed on budget day, but which amount to 17 billion euro in corporate tax expenditures every year, which if you go and look at these little fine tables on the revenue are described, and they are costs to the exchequer. Public money, 17 billion euro going in tax breaks to the big corporations. But if all of that is too mind-boggling, here's a simple contrast. The Special Assignee Relief Programme, tax break. A tax break only available to those who have salaries higher than 75,000 euro, but up to millions of euro. There are 50 people, for example, in receipt of SARP, according to a document that the Minister for Finance helpfully provided to us this morning, earning in excess of €1 million, and they get a tax break of 30%. 30% of the income they earn between 75,000 euro and €1 million is not taxed at all. And they get reliefs to send their children to private schools and to go on trips back to America or Britain or wherever it is. Imagine that. Imagine a particular relief only for those with the highest of high incomes, including millionaires, that is not given to ordinary workers. But that figure, people should just consider it. 38.2 million to the highest earners in the ongoing SARP relief. How much given additional to mental health this year? 36 million. All the people suffering from the mental health crisis, which it worsened exponentially over the last year, get less than 1,500 of the wealthiest earners in this country. Tens of thousands of people suffering the mental health crisis, and this government gives them 38 million this year, gave them 42 million last year, and will continue to do it for years ahead, but only 36 million for those additional money for mental health services that are chronically underfunded. That even with this increase, less than 6% of the health budget will be going on mental health when the World Health Organization has said it should be 12%. You would need an additional €1 billion to reach what are the World Health Organization's recommended levels of health expenditure on mental health, and you give a miserable 36 million, but you give more than that to 1,500 of the best paid executives. Or here's another contrast with the same amount of money. How much do the students get in additional grants? We have nearly 250,000 students in this country, and they got 35 million extra in the budget. Nearly 80,000 students in receipt of SUSI grants, but 80,000 students get less extra from this budget than 1,500 of the best paid executives in the country. That says it all. That says it all about this government's priorities. Line the pockets of the rich with tax reliefs, while working people are asked to pick up the bill for COVID and will be struggling, as students are, to put a roof over their head or sleeping on couches, or elderly and vulnerable people shivering in the cold and making decisions to turn off the heat because they haven't got enough money to buy food. But you think it is okay to give more to millionaire executives in this budget of public money than to give to those vulnerable people. It is nothing short of shameful. And there are some other stuff that are worth looking at in this budget, which, because I'm a nerd, I love going through the estimates books, where you get the truth of what's actually going on, as against all the grand statements, the propaganda and the spin. The Greens, who are going to save the climate. What's actually happened? Less money for forestry this year than last year. And our level of afforestation to address the climate crisis is abysmal. We haven't hit our forestry targets for decades. They are so far short of what was recommended by COFORT nearly a decade ago, absolutely abysmal, but 99 million allocated last year for forestry, 96 million this year, an actual fall in the investment in afforestation. Transport capital budget, sustainable mobility, carbon reduction and public transport. Last year, 2.4 billion allocated. This year, 900 million allocated. A dramatic reduction in the capital investment in public transport and climate-related transport. So it seems, Count Corla, we got the cycle lanes and that's it. That's what we're getting in terms of radical transport measures to address the climate crisis, to increase the capacity of our public transport system in order to take people out of their cars. No money for the additional buses we need in the bus fleet, to provide more public service routes in this city, in rural areas in particular. No significant increase, in fact, a dramatic reduction. Similar reduction in the climate action and environment leadership heading, a big drop in the amount of money allocated in that. Arts and culture, the people who carried us through the pandemic, in terms of the music we listened to, the films we watched in streaming, all of that, and who are absolutely hammered with the public health measures and restrictions which they are still affected by. What was the budget for 2021 for current expenditure on arts? 65 million. What's the budget for 2022 for the arts? 65 million. Not a cent extra. All the lip service, all the rhetoric of how much we care about our arts workers, our entertainment workers, our musicians, not a cent extra in the current expenditure budget. And one could go on. I see you. I mean, you would think after the COVID pandemic, you would realise the absolute critical, urgent imperative of getting the intensive care capacity of this country up to at least the European average level. But what will happen after this budget? We will still be below half of the intensive care capacity level of the rest of Europe, where we have just under 6 ICU beds per 100,000 of population, whereas the average in Europe is 12 ICU beds, twice what we have. And you go to countries like Germany and other countries and they have multiples of that. And people should understand the implications of that. If we are compelled back into further lockdowns, it will be because our health service, and particularly our critical care capacity, is not adequate to deal with a public health emergency. But is there an increase to bring it up to the sort of levels where we could potentially cope with a public health emergency? No, and the details aren't clear in this budget as to what's the situation with our public health teams, but just to remind people, the public health teams you need to cope with these sort of public health emergencies were 1/3 of the recommended staffing levels before COVID, and there is no sign that they will be brought up to the recommended levels of staffing from what I can see. Some marginal increase in recruitment in some areas, but still way, way short of what is necessary. The budget boasts about additional money going into the health budget overall, but again, when you take into account medical inflation, it'll be more or less wiped away, and demographic changes mean we have an older population, we have more vulnerable people using the health service, and we are so far short of the capacity necessary in order to clear the waiting list of nearly 1 million people on waiting lists, waiting for procedures, some of them waiting 2 and 3 years for vital procedures, and nowhere near. And you look at what's happening in hospitals in the week that we are talking, where there is 20 and 30% staff deficits in many of the ED units. And the overcrowding that we had pre-COVID is coming back, and coming back with a vengeance. And to be honest, I'm sure every TD, including the minister sitting over there, is hearing the horror stories starting to come back again of people sitting, elderly, vulnerable people sitting in ED units for hours and hours and hours and hours and not being seen because the staff are absolutely overrun, they're completely demoralised because we haven't given the capacity, we haven't recruited the staff. And why are we unable to recruit the staff? Why are the student nurses, after they qualify, running out of the country? Running out of the country in large numbers. Why do more than 70% of them want to leave after they qualify? Because you won't pay them on placement, and then when they do qualify, they can't afford the rent because you won't control the rents. And you can't deliver the public and affordable housing, and there is nothing in this budget to suggest that you're serious about it. And to be honest, I mean, it's sort of something. I was asked by the Students' Union UCD to go and speak at the protest tomorrow that'll be happening outside Dublin City Council after the absolutely shocking comments of Owen Keegan. But you see, it's not just about Mr. Keegan. It is about the marketisation of housing, even down to the level of student accommodation. You know, we warned that when that expensive student accommodation was being built, and many others did too, not just us, when that expensive student accommodation was being built by investment firms, that no ordinary student could afford it, and it would end up as the tenements of the future. And that's what's going to happen. Change of use now being given for that student accommodation. Thousands of students have nowhere to go. They can't afford that, but we'll give them change of use to turn it into something else so they can make profit. No problem. And what change of uses will come after that on all these developments that have shot up all over the place in order to ensure that these investors can make their pound of flesh off the back of the housing crisis and the market, the property market in this country that has gone out of all control. But it is a feeding frenzy for the rich, an absolute feeding frenzy for the people who own multiple properties. I mean, one thing we suggest in our alternative budget, among many things, to redress the inequality in how these things are treated. You know, the people are getting their property tax bills through the letterbox at the moment, and many people are quite worried about the increases they're seeing, about the increased valuation of their property on a roof that is just their roof, their family roof over their head. And I tell you, the anger is beginning to build on this one, Minister. Very, very worried people on very low incomes, seeing significant increases in many cases in the property tax they're going to be charged. Now, wouldn't a simple measure, not to punish people for the roof that's over their head, to abolish the property tax on the principal private residence and levy it instead on people who have multiple properties? Because by definition, if you have 2 properties or 3 properties or 10 properties, you can manage to pay a property tax. But if it's just your family roof over your head and you're reliant on a pension and your energy costs are going through the roof, how the hell are you supposed to pay it? But no, even that simple measure, and you could cover, and we costed in our alternative budget, we've done it every year for multiple years, but in this year of all years, we should be thinking about that when we see what's happening in the property sector. That would be a fair measure, to claw back some of the extortionate profits that are made from people who have multiple properties, who are renting them out at extortionate rents to people who are struggling on basic incomes or on very low incomes, and not punish them with additional taxes and charges on the roof over their head. So, thanks to Minister English for at least having the courtesy to be here, but it really is a pity that the senior ministers who deliver the budgets wouldn't listen to the spokespeople from all the other party groups who listen to them in terms of delivering their budget. But as I said, the simple summary of this budget is the vast majority of working people will be worse off at the end of next year after this budget, because you have done nothing to address the spiralling cost of living, the spiralling cost of accommodation and other price hikes that people are suffering. The wealthy will continue to get wealthier. So it's the same old for Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael. Look after the people at the top, but ordinary people will pay the price. But people will not be fooled. They will see through this budget for what it is. €5, 0.5% in increases. It's insulting. People know it's insulting, and you will feel the wrath of people, particularly after COVID, because there's no reward. It's not only is there not a reward, you've actually punished them for the huge effort and sacrifice and endurance that people showed during the course of the pandemic, and you've now asked them to pay the bill with a completely unjust budget.